Tonight, we journey to a crisp autumn day in 1095 where you stand among thousands beneath the open skies of Clermont. The air is heavy with anticipation, and the ground beneath you is wet with the first whispers of fall. As you stand there, a sense of unease surrounds you, a tension you can almost taste. It's the kind of uneasy stillness that presages something monumental. And then the moment you've all been waiting for arrives. Pope Urban II has come to address the gathered crowd. But what's truly remarkable is that you're about to witness a turning point in history, the kind that will ripple across continents through centuries and into the very heart of Christendom. His words, spoken in the shadow of a world divided by faith and politics, will ignite the flames of the First Crusade, a religious and military journey that will not only change the course of history, but also send tremors across the medieval world. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world, like a family, scattered but still connected. All right. Now, go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background, something that feels like home. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. Pope Urban II standing before you doesn't look like someone who is about to shake the very foundations of Europe. The crowd is dense men of all walks of life, knights in their gleaming armor, peasants, and the clergy. His robe is simple and his manner is calm, but as you listen you can feel the weight of his words. This is no ordinary speech. It is the birth of an idea that will shape the medieval world for generations. His voice rises and falls, a calm yet commanding cadence, and what begins as a whisper spreads like wildfire through the crowd. You can already feel the stirrings of something vast, as if this speech is not just a call to arms, but the promise of something more, something divine. The Pope's words, though simple at first, speak of the Holy Land, Jerusalem to be exact, and how it lies in the hands of the infidels. It is a city that holds the very essence of Christian faith, but it is no longer under Christian rule. He invokes the names of saints, the martyrs, who once walked its streets, and the land that once echoed with the footsteps of Christ himself. The tension in the crowd thickens. You can almost hear every breath as the promise of salvation mixes with the scent of battle. A long-lost land calls for rescue, and the Pope offers them a path to redeem their souls. To you, the message is clear. This isn't merely a call to reclaim land. It is a summons to salvation, a chance for redemption, both spiritually and physically. As the crowd listens, Urban's speech draws on themes that are well known to medieval Europeans: the threat of external enemies, the need to defend Christian lands, and the desire to reclaim what was lost. But his true genius is in how he intertwines these themes with promises of spiritual rewards, of absolution for sins, of a place in heaven for those who heed the call. The political, military, and religious motives all converge, blending in a way that is both thrilling and terrifying. To fully understand the thunderous impact of Pope Urban II's speech, it's essential to know who he was and what drove him. Before standing before the crowds in Clermont, Urban wasn't born to the high nobility or the great wealth of the church. Instead, he had a more humble rise, working his way through the intricacies of medieval ecclesiastical politics, mastering the art of balancing spiritual authority with secular power. His ascent to the papacy in 1088, following the controversial election, was anything but smooth, and his reign was marked by a series of power struggles that shaped his decisions. Urban's time as pope came at a moment when the papacy itself was at a crossroads. The church, still reeling from internal corruption and the recent conflicts with secular powers like the Holy Roman Empire, was looking for a unifying cause, something that could rally the Christian world under one banner. The call to liberate Jerusalem to save Christendom was more than just a religious mission. It was a political move calculated to reassert papal influence in a time of fragmentation. The papacy needed to restore its position as the central authority in Europe, and what better way to do that than by leading a grand cause that would unite kings, knights, and peasants alike. As the speech unfolds, you begin to realize that Urban isn't just asking for soldiers. He's asking for something deeper, something more profound. He's asking for faith, loyalty, and the willingness to die for a cause that transcends earthly concerns. This was a time when the Church was the spiritual heart of European life, and its influence stretched far beyond the walls of monasteries and cathedrals. Every battle fought, every war waged, was seen as a part of God's plan. And now, Urban's call would unite Christendom in a way that no one could have predicted. Historians still argue whether Urban's motivations were purely religious, or if his speech was designed to solidify his own power in the Catholic Church. There is the suggestion that he saw this as an opportunity to take control of the fractured Christian world, to regain lands lost to the Muslims, and to strengthen the papacy's role in European affairs. The Crusade, after all, would lead to the papacy becoming more involved in secular governance than ever before, as the Pope would soon oversee the fates of entire kingdoms and territories. But that doesn't diminish the impact of Urban's speech. Whether his intentions were rooted in politics, religion, or a blend of both, the result was undeniable. You can feel the heat of the moment, the energy rising in the crowd around you, as the idea of a grand Christian army takes shape in the minds of all who hear his words. The Pope's ability to ignite such fervor speaks to his deep understanding of the medieval world, its passions, its fears, and its hopes. The response is immediate. You can hear the first murmurs ripple through the crowd as Urban's words take hold. Those in the crowd, peasants, knights, and nobles, are all swept up in the moment. To them, this isn't just a religious war, it's an opportunity for something more. For some, it's a chance for fame, fortune, and land. For others, it's a pathway to salvation, an absolution of sins that promises eternal peace. The air is thick with anticipation. A new chapter in history is about to begin, and you can feel it deep within your bones. As the murmurs grow louder and the excitement of the crowd builds, your attention shifts, and you begin to consider the world outside Clermont. You start to visualize the distant lands. Urban has spoken of the Holy Land, Jerusalem itself, the city at the center of Christian faith, yet now a land held by Muslim forces. For the people of medieval Europe, Jerusalem wasn't just another city. It was the cradle of Christianity, a place where Jesus Christ had walked, died, and been resurrected. Its sanctity was unquestionable, and yet it had long been lost to the infidels. But why Jerusalem? What was it that made this city so pivotal? The answer is rooted in the very nature of Christian belief. Jerusalem was the spiritual epicenter of Christendom, a symbol of both religious authority and divine truth. The idea that it had fallen under foreign control was an affront to the medieval Christian world. For centuries, pilgrims had made their way to the holy city, braving harsh landscapes, enduring long journeys, all to touch the places where Christ had once been. For the people of medieval Europe, Jerusalem was more than just a physical city. It was the earthly embodiment of the divine. Historians still argue whether the fall of Jerusalem was the main motivating factor behind the Crusades, or whether it was the deteriorating situation of the Byzantine Empire that truly spurred Urban into action. The Byzantine Empire, already under threat from Muslim forces, had sent an urgent plea for help in the years leading up to Urban's call. Perhaps some historians suggest Urban saw this as a chance to extend papal influence in the East to heal the rift between the Western and Eastern branches of Christianity. The fact that Urban's speech also called for the liberation of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, hints at this possible strategic motive. But no matter the reason, the idea of reclaiming Jerusalem resonated deeply with the people who gathered in Clermont. You can almost hear the collective sigh of longing, the yearning for a return to a time when Christendom ruled supreme. And to these men and women, the call to arms was a righteous one, an opportunity to gain favor with God, to repay the sins of a lifetime, and to restore Christian dominance over the land once held by their ancestors. It's easy to imagine the picture in your mind, those gathered in the crowd at Clermont, listening intently, some with tears in their eyes, others with determination etched into their faces. These were the men who would soon form the heart of the First Crusade. The knights hardened in battle and the peasants who would follow them into the unknown, each hearing Urban's words through their own lens. The call wasn't just to take up arms, it was to fulfill a divine mission. You can almost hear the promise echoing in your mind as it did in theirs. By taking Jerusalem, they would gain not only eternal salvation, but also the glory and the honor of reclaiming what had been lost. The political and military implications of such a mission were undeniable. In the background of this grand spiritual campaign, the Crusades were also about power and land. The Byzantine Empire, already struggling against Muslim advances, stood on the brink of collapse. Urban's offer of aid wasn't just about charity, it was an opportunity to strike a blow against Muslim forces while simultaneously reasserting the Papacy's influence over Eastern Christendom. But even as you stand among the crowd in Clermont, you can feel the uncertainty. There is no clear path to success, and the dangers of this campaign are ever present. The journey will be long, the hardships unimaginable, and the toll, both human and spiritual, will be steep. And yet as Urban speaks, these thoughts are lost in the fervor of the crowd, in the belief that this mission is ordained by God, a righteous crusade to reclaim the holiest of lands. The moment Urban's speech reaches its crescendo, you can feel the entire atmosphere in Clermont shift. The crowd is no longer simply listening, they are caught in a rapture, a fervent collective response that echoes across the land. It's almost as if Urban's words are no longer just human speech, but a divine summons. You see the first movements of the crowd, heads turning eyes, widening hearts, quickening with the urgency of what is being promised to them. The promise of salvation, of forgiveness, of eternal glory. Each word Urban speaks seems to reach deeper into the souls of those listening. God wills it, he declares. And the phrase, simple as it is, carries the weight of divine authority. The crowd, stunned into a mixture of awe and disbelief, erupts into an enthusiastic roar. You feel it too, the overwhelming sense that something extraordinary is happening. The air is thick with excitement, anticipation, and a certain sacred fear. Fear not of the battle ahead, but of the consequence of refusing a call so evidently divine. The very idea of undertaking such a grand and dangerous mission is tempered by the overwhelming promise of salvation. To fight for Jerusalem, to answer Urban's call, is to walk in the footsteps of saints and martyrs who have gone before. As the response spreads through the crowd, you see knights, their faces already lit with the fire of conquest, clasp hands with peasants whose expressions betray a mixture of uncertainty and hope. These were not the people you would expect to share a common cause, yet here they are, unified in the belief that this cause, this war for Jerusalem, is not just a call to arms, but a call to eternal life. You watch as the mood shifts from hesitation to unrestrained enthusiasm. It is a moment that transcends earthly concerns, where politics and personal ambition fade into the background of something much greater. Historians still argue whether the Pope's rhetoric was the sole reason for the widespread response to his call, or whether other factors such as the desire for land wealth and power played a significant role. Certainly the speech tapped into the deep-seated piety of the time, the medieval belief that earthly wars were often intertwined with divine will. But there is no denying that Urban's ability to stir such fervor was a key factor in the Crusade's success. His words reached into the hearts of people who were perhaps searching for meaning in a chaotic, turbulent world, offering them not just a mission, but a purpose. As you stand in this sea of eager faces, you begin to grasp the scale of what Urban has set in motion. This is not just a military campaign, it is a movement, one that will stretch across kingdoms, crossing vast territories, impacting the lives of countless individuals. You can imagine how for some this was a chance for redemption, for others an opportunity for adventure or wealth. But for many it was a mission that carried the promise of eternal life, a spiritual journey that was as much about the soul as it was about the sword. You hear the sounds of people chanting, raising their voices in unison to the Pope's call. Deus vult, they shout. God wills it. The words seem to become a chant, a prayer, a battle cry that will resonate far beyond the borders of Clermont. You begin to understand this is more than a war. It is a holy mission, a movement of faith, and a crusade that will change the course of history forever. The excitement continues to build, and yet as you look around, there's also a sense of something else, a quiet acknowledgement of the danger ahead. You see men, some of whom are already imagining the glory they will gain on the battlefield, but you also see the solemn faces of those who understand that this journey, this war, will claim lives. But that is the price of salvation. You feel the uncertainty in the air, the recognition that while some might see this as a chance for personal gain, for others, this is a test of faith, a trial that will prove their devotion to God. The question that remains, however, is was Urban's call purely religious, or was it driven by more earthly concerns? Some argue that the Pope knew that the success of this crusade would reassert the power of the papacy across Europe. By leading a successful campaign to the Holy Land, Urban would not only solidify his spiritual authority, but also increase the political influence of the Church. The papacy's involvement in secular matters, including the governance of territories and kingdoms, would be significantly enhanced. Regardless of the underlying motives, Urban's speech has ignited a fire that will soon spread throughout Europe. The crusade is now a certainty, an idea that will galvanize knights, peasants, and kings alike. But with this certainty comes the weight of the unknown, the dangers of the journey, the harshness of the land they will cross, and the uncertainty of whether they will ever see their homeland again. Urban's call has created a moment of religious fervor, but it has also created a vast, sprawling military campaign that will reshape Europe's future and the future of the Holy Land. The response to Pope Urban II's call for the First Crusade wasn't just loud, it was immediate and sweeping. You watch as knights begin to step forward, pledging their swords to the cause, some offering to take the lead, others to follow wherever they are needed. But it's the peasants who catch your attention. They too step forward not with swords, but with a determination that only the promise of salvation can foster. Their devotion isn't to land or to gold, but to the chance of redemption. In their eyes you see not warriors, but pilgrims who are about to undertake the most dangerous journey of their lives, all for the hope of eternal peace. As you stand there, you feel the weight of the decision they are making. These are people who are about to leave everything behind, families, homes, familiar faces, to follow an idea, a vision of something greater than themselves. It is a decision driven by faith, but also by the allure of something far more tangible, a place in heaven, a promise of forgiveness, and perhaps the fame and fortune that might come with the conquest of a holy city. The energy in the air is electrifying. The fervor that grips these men and women is nothing short of transformative. Some historians suggest that for the nobles and knights, the crusade represented a chance for glory, land, and wealth, a chance to expand their holdings in the name of Christ. For the peasants, however, it was often about redemption. It was an opportunity to erase their sins, to participate in something that transcended the mundane struggles of life. This was a spiritual venture as much as it was a military one, and for many the promise of an eternal reward was enough to drive them to risk everything. What's fascinating is the diversity of the response. As knights, nobles, and peasants pledge their participation, you witness a spectrum of motivations. The wealthy landowners are keenly aware of the land and wealth to be gained, while the lower classes are drawn in by the hope of divine absolution. The Pope's speech and the fervor it stirred managed to unite people from all walks of life under one cause. And although the idea of joining a war might seem terrifying to some, the crusade is perceived by many as something profoundly liberating, an act of devotion, a way to fight for the faith, and ultimately a means to achieve salvation. Historians still argue whether Urban understood the full extent of the fervor he was unleashing. Was he aware that his words designed to strengthen Christian unity and reassert papal power would lead to one of the most massive military campaigns of the medieval world? Would he have foreseen the death toll, the suffering, and the long-term consequences that would stretch far beyond the holy city of Jerusalem? Perhaps Urban saw the crusade as a way to bolster the church's influence, but he could not have predicted the chaos and conflict it would fuel for centuries to come. As you witness the fervor of the crowd in Clermont, you start to grasp just how much is at stake. For Urban, this was an opportunity to solidify his control over Christendom and to counter the growing influence of secular rulers. For those in the crowd, however, the stakes are both personal and spiritual. Some are driven by the hope of redemption, others by the lure of material wealth, and still others by the belief that they are fulfilling a divine destiny. The crusade which Urban has set in motion is now an irresistible force, a movement that will stretch from the fields of France to the deserts of the Holy Land. You feel the excitement, the thrill, and even the fear that grips the crowd as men and women of all social classes prepare for what lies ahead. The unknown is vast and full of peril, yet the promise of eternal life beckons. As the crowd grows larger and the fervor intensifies, you realize that the path to Jerusalem is now inevitable. Urban's words have catalyzed a force that cannot be undone. The crusade has begun, and you are a witness to the dawn of one of the most transformative events in medieval history. As the echoes of Pope Urban II's speech reverberate through the crowd, you begin to sense the weight of what is unfolding. What had started as a gathering in Clermont, a simple call for aid in the East, has quickly morphed into something far greater, a spiritual, military and political movement that will shape the course of history. The fervor is contagious, but beneath the excitement there are hints of doubt, questions that remain unspoken. Was this truly a call to liberate Jerusalem, or was it something more? Urban's speech, though powerfully delivered, seems to have stirred a complexity of motives, some more political than religious. Historians still argue whether Urban was driven primarily by a genuine desire to reclaim Jerusalem, or if his intentions were more self-serving. Did he see this as a way to strengthen papal authority, or was he truly trying to unite Christendom in a righteous cause? Some scholars suggest that his decision to call for the crusade was in part a response to the Byzantine Empire's request for assistance against the advancing Muslim forces. Urban, in this interpretation, saw a unique opportunity to repair the rift between the eastern and western branches of Christianity. By leading a joint campaign to retake Jerusalem, Urban could bolster the papacy's influence over the East, thereby strengthening his own position within the Christian world. On the other hand, many historians argue that Urban's speech was just as much about asserting the supremacy of the papacy over secular rulers as it was about religious motives. At this point in history, the Church's authority had been steadily challenged by powerful kings and princes, especially in France and the Holy Roman Empire. By launching the Crusade, Urban could not only solidify his spiritual leadership, but also reassert the Church's power in the political sphere. After all, controlling the destiny of Christendom was not merely about spiritual matters, it also involved the realm of worldly influence. And yet amid these debates, one thing remains clear. Urban's rhetoric was a masterstroke in the art of persuasion. He framed the crusade as a righteous cause, a war sanctioned by God himself. For the masses gathered in Clermont, it was not merely a political move, but a divine imperative. The promise of salvation, the chance to wipe away sins, and the hope of eternal life, these were powerful motivators, so much so that they masked the political complexity beneath the surface. You watched the reactions of the people around you, their faces illuminated by the fires of belief and fervor. The noble knights see this as a path to glory, to land, and to riches. Some might even hope for recognition, for a place in the annals of history as the men who reclaimed Jerusalem. For the peasants, however, the motivation is spiritual. They are not fighting for land or wealth, but for the promise of divine redemption. The dichotomy is striking: a crusade that unites the piety of the common folk with the ambition of the powerful. It's clear that Urban's words have sparked not just a military campaign, but a collision of motivations. Historians also point to the profound effect that Urban's call had on European society. The idea of a holy war sanctioned by God was nothing new. The concept of crusading had existed in the Christian tradition long before Clermont and the Papacy had been involved in smaller-scale religious wars. But what Urban did at Clermont was different. He created a cause so grand, so irresistible, that it spanned social classes and national borders. The notion of a just war against infidels had been around for centuries, but Urban's speech was a turning point, one that set in motion the First Crusade, the first of many. But as you stand there among the enthusiastic crowd, it's hard to ignore the darker undercurrent to all this. The promise of salvation, the sense of divine purpose, masks the harsh reality of the coming journey. You know that the Crusaders, those who have pledged themselves to this holy cause, are about to embark on a perilous journey. The road ahead will be filled with hardship, death, and betrayal. For every soul who answers the call with sincere devotion, there are others who are motivated by less noble impulses, greed, ambition, and the promise of land and riches. The question that lingers is whether the Crusaders are truly fighting for a religious cause, or if they are simply pawns in a political game. Pope Urban II's speech has set the stage for a religious war of unprecedented scale. But in the years to come, the lines between faith and power will become increasingly blurred. And though Urban's words have united Christendom under one banner, they have also set in motion a series of events that will lead to centuries of conflict, division, and suffering. But for now, as you stand among the throngs in Clermont, the air thick with anticipation, one thing is certain: the crusade has begun. Its fate is sealed, and its legacy will be felt for generations to come. As the fervor of the crowd reaches a fever pitch, you begin to wonder, what exactly was Pope Urban II promising these men and women who pledged their lives to the Crusade salvation? Certainly, but the Pope's speech carried far more than that. He had invoked the most powerful weapon of all, faith. For centuries, the Christian world had been shaped by the idea of sin and redemption, by the promise of eternal life after death. Urban, recognizing the deep-seated piety of his listeners, framed the crusade not merely as a military campaign, but as a divine calling. To join the crusade was to be given a path to redemption, a chance to atone for sins, no matter how grievous. This promise of salvation is woven into every word of Urban's speech, and it speaks directly to the hearts of those in the crowd. For the knights and nobles, the promise of spiritual redemption is entangled with the allure of glory, wealth, and land. But for the peasants, the promise is far more urgent. These are people who live their lives in toil under the heavy burden of poverty and sin. The idea of marching off to the Holy Land to fight for the faith, and in doing so, securing their place in heaven, is a powerful motivator. It's a promise that transcends earthly struggles, offering something much more profound than any material gain. Historians still argue about the role of salvation in motivating the Crusaders. Was it truly the promise of eternal life that spurred tens of thousands to embark on this perilous journey? Or was it perhaps the lure of riches, power, and land that drove them? Some scholars contend that the spiritual motivation was strong, but ultimately secondary to the material desires of the Crusaders. After all, many of the nobles who answered Urban's call were motivated by the prospect of acquiring lands in the East lands that had been lost to the Muslims for centuries. For these men, the crusade represented a chance to expand their wealth and influence all, while cloaking their ambitions in the righteousness of a holy war. Yet despite these competing motives, it's impossible to ignore the sincerity of the faith that drove so many of the Crusaders. You can see it in the eyes of the peasants as they eagerly sign up, driven by the belief that they are doing God's work, that they are walking in the footsteps of saints and martyrs. They know that the journey will be hard, that the hardships ahead will be many, but the chance to atone for their sins, to secure their place in heaven, is worth every sacrifice. Urban's words have become a beacon for those who have lived in darkness and despair, a light that promises salvation, glory, and divine favor. As you look around, you realize that Urban's speech has not only ignited a military campaign, it has created a movement that will transcend time. The Crusaders are not just soldiers, they are pilgrims on a sacred journey driven by faith, by duty, and by a profound belief that they are part of something much greater than themselves. This movement will change the course of history, and its reverberations will be felt across centuries as generations of Crusaders carry the torch of this holy mission forward. But even as you feel the weight of their devotion, there's an undercurrent of something darker, something more human. These Crusaders, for all their piety, are still bound by the same earthly desires as the rest of us. Some are driven by faith, yes, but others are driven by the lure of power, land, and wealth. They see the crusade not only as a spiritual mission, but as a chance to carve out a piece of the world for themselves. And in the years to come, these ambitions will clash with the religious idealism that originally drove the Crusade. Historians have long debated whether the Crusade's success can be attributed more to religious fervor or to the ambition of the Crusaders themselves. Some suggest that the leaders of the Crusade, the knights and nobles, were driven primarily by a desire for personal gain cloaked in the rhetoric of faith. Others argue that the faith of the common crusaders who were not seeking land or power was what gave the crusade its initial momentum. In either case, the consequences of the First Crusade would be profound. It would not only shape the future of the Holy Land, but also alter the course of European history, as the papacy's influence would be strengthened and the political landscape of Europe would be forever changed. As you stand there watching the excited faces of the Crusaders, you can't help but feel the weight of what lies ahead. This journey, begun in the heart of France, will take them across treacherous lands, through scorching deserts and snow-capped mountains, into the very heart of the Muslim world. The promise of salvation will drive them, but so too will their ambition and their desire for glory. The road to Jerusalem is long and fraught with danger, but for those who are willing to fight for their faith, it is a road that leads to eternal life. As the masses slowly begin to disperse from Clermont, the fervor that had gripped them still lingers in the air. The speech of Pope Urban II has catalyzed a monumental shift, and the crowd now starts to take shape into something that's much more than a temporary rally. It is the beginning of a movement that will sweep across Europe and into the Holy Land. But you can't help but wonder, what will this crusade really mean for the people embarking on this journey? How will it affect the lives of not just the soldiers, but the families they leave behind and the societies they come from? For the knights and nobles, the crusade offers a new opportunity to carve out a place in the world. Many are drawn not just by the promise of spiritual redemption, but by the potential for land wealth and political power in the East. Urban's call wasn't just about religious devotion, it was also an invitation to those who sought to expand their influence, to gain territories, and to return home as heroes. The prospect of new fiefdoms in the fertile lands of the Levant was an undeniable incentive, one that would eventually lead to the establishment of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, with its own complex web of feudal loyalties and tensions. But for the peasants, the crusade holds a different kind of meaning. To them, the call to Jerusalem is not about land or glory, it is about faith. These men and women, often living on the fringes of society, see the crusade as a way to gain the spiritual rewards that have been promised to them, an opportunity to atone for their sins and to secure their place in heaven. The journey for them will be a pilgrimage of devotion, a chance to serve God by reclaiming His holy city. Many will march into the unknown knowing full well that they may never return, but the faith that drives them is so deeply rooted that it transforms their journey from a perilous military campaign to a sacred quest, a pilgrimage that offers the hope of eternal peace. Historians still debate whether the Crusades truly changed medieval European society in the long run. Some argue that the impact was profound, transforming the structure of feudal society, while others point to the many lives lost and the resources expended as evidence that the Crusades did little to improve the lives of common people. The realities of the Crusade were often far harsher than the promises made at Clermont. The soldiers who left their homes for the Holy Land would face extreme hardships, starvation, disease, and the dangers of hostile terrain. For many, the Crusade would be a death sentence. The harsh conditions and the constant threat of battle would take a toll on the Crusaders' bodies and spirits. As you reflect on these individuals, those peasants, those knights, you realize that the impact of the Crusades would be felt long after they returned or failed to return from the Holy Land. The Crusades would leave an indelible mark on medieval society. For the first time, large-scale religious warfare would become a regular part of European life, altering the relationship between the church, secular rulers, and the common people. The papacy would rise to unprecedented heights of power, as Urban had hoped, but the costs of this power, both human and material, would eventually become apparent. But there's another dimension to the Crusades that must be considered, one that is often overlooked. The Crusaders were not just fighting against the Muslim forces, they were also challenging the worldviews of their own time. The very idea of a holy war, of a just war sanctioned by God, would be debated by theologians for centuries to come. Was it truly righteous to take up arms in God's name? Could war ever be justified no matter how pious the cause? The answers to these questions would vary, but the Crusades would forever shape the way the West viewed warfare and its place within religious doctrine. What's more, the Crusades created deep, lasting divisions between the Christian and Muslim worlds, divisions that would persist for centuries. The initial promise of the Crusades reclaiming Jerusalem for Christendom would not come to fruition in the way many had hoped. The Crusaders would capture Jerusalem, but the city would soon be retaken by Muslim forces. And while the Latin kingdoms in the east would provide a brief moment of Christian dominance in the region, the legacy of the Crusades would be one of ongoing conflict, mistrust, and territorial dispute. You can imagine standing there among the crowds at Clermont that Urban himself could not have predicted the full scope of what he had set in motion. The consequences of his speech, the First Crusade, would be felt in both the Christian and Muslim worlds. The political landscape of Europe would shift in ways that he could not have foreseen. As the feudal system was challenged, new alliances were formed, and the idea of Christian dominance would be tested time and again. The response to Urban's speech at Clermont has changed everything. The world will never be the same. The seeds of future conflict, future change, and future reform have been planted here, and whether for better or worse, it is impossible to know. All you can do now as you stand in the crowd and witness the transformation taking place is marvel at how words delivered by one man have the power to reshape the world. As the Crusaders begin to make preparations for their journey, the excitement of the early days in Clermont begins to settle into the reality of the task at hand. What was once an abstract call to arms spoken in the heat of Urban II's passionate rhetoric is now becoming something far more tangible. You can see it in the men, both noble and common, as they begin to organize, to gather supplies, and to form the ranks of what will soon become a vast army. The first stage of the crusade has begun, but you sense that the true challenges lie not in the battle for Jerusalem, but in the journey itself. For these crusaders, the Holy Land feels both distant and near, a goal that now seems within reach but requires overcoming immense physical and emotional obstacles. The path to Jerusalem is long and treacherous, crossing vast territories, navigating harsh deserts, and enduring climates that could bring even the hardiest to their knees. The journey, which will take years for many, will test not only the Crusaders' physical endurance, but also their faith. Every step away from home will be a reminder of what they have left behind: their families, their lands, and their lives. The emotional toll of the journey will be as significant as the physical one as they march into the unknown, driven by the hope of salvation and the desire to fulfill a sacred duty. But it's not just the Crusaders who are affected. Their departure ripples through Europe, especially in the towns and villages they leave behind. Families are torn apart, with wives, children, and communities left behind unsure of whether their loved ones will ever return. Many of the Crusaders, you realize, are not wealthy men or powerful lords with vast estates. They are common people, peasants, who see the crusade not as a chance to conquer land, but as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to secure a place in heaven. For them, this is not just a military campaign, it is a pilgrimage, a journey of devotion and hope. And yet as they leave behind the reality of their lives, a reality that will continue on without them. Historians still debate whether the Crusades truly brought about long-lasting change for the European peasants who took part. Did the promise of salvation truly justify the sacrifice of so many lives? The truth is that many peasants would never return to their homes, and those who did return found that their lives had been irreparably altered. The land they had left behind had changed hands, their families had moved on, and the world they knew had shifted in their absence. The Crusades, for all their religious fervor, also brought about significant social upheaval. The vast numbers of soldiers who took part in the First Crusade were drawn from all layers of society and as they departed, they left a hole in the structure of medieval European life. What's more, as you watch these crusaders make their way through the villages of Europe, you begin to see how the Church, through Urban's leadership, has become not only the spiritual authority but the political force behind the crusade. The papacy, which had already held great sway over European rulers, now held even more power, leveraging the promise of salvation and redemption to rally kings and commoners alike. The Church's influence over the course of this campaign, its ability to direct military efforts and, more importantly, to shape public perception, would only increase in the years to come. Pope Urban II had set in motion not just a military campaign, but a movement that would reshape the religious and political fabric of Europe. In the years that follow, you'll see the consequences of this moment, how the Crusades would evolve, and how Urban's original intent would shift as political ambitions grew, as kingdoms jostled for power, and as the Church's hold over the Crusaders became more entrenched. But for now, as you watch the first waves of soldiers depart, it's clear that this moment in Clermont, where Urban's words first set the world on fire, has become a symbol of something much greater, a religious and political force that will define the history of both the West and the East for centuries to come. The journey to the Holy Land may have begun with a promise of salvation, but as you reflect on the path ahead, you understand that the crusade will be more than just a religious war. It will be a crucible in which medieval Europe's social, political, and religious dynamics will be tested and transformed. The battles fought in the Holy Land will not just be about land or power, they will be about the very nature of faith, the relationship between church and state, and the way in which the world views conflict, religion, and conquest. What began with a single speech at Clermont has now become a call to arms that will shape the future of two continents. Urban's vision has transcended the limits of the papacy, becoming a symbol of both religious idealism and political ambition. And as the Crusaders make their way eastward, you can't help but feel that this moment in history, this first wave of warriors heading toward the Holy Land, is only the beginning of a much larger story, one that will continue to unfold for centuries, leaving its mark on the world. The journey of the Crusaders is now underway, and as the months pass, the fervor that began in Clermont slowly shifts from one of passionate anticipation to one of bitter reality. The excitement of embarking on a sacred mission has been tempered by the harshness of the journey. As you imagine the Crusaders trudging along the dusty roads of Europe, you can almost feel the weight of their exhaustion, both physical and spiritual. The journey to the Holy Land is long, unforgiving, and full of perils that no speech or promise could ever truly prepare them for. The first challenge is the sheer length of the journey. The Crusaders, many of whom had never traveled far from their villages or castles, must now cross vast stretches of land, encountering not only the unforgiving elements, but also the diverse peoples and cultures that populate the regions between Europe and the Levant. The journey takes them through the Byzantine Empire, a Christian kingdom whose rulers are already struggling with the rise of Muslim forces in the east. These lands are unfamiliar, and each step forward is fraught with uncertainty. Historians still debate whether the Crusaders' experience of the journey was more a test of faith or a harsh military campaign. The battles fought along the way were certainly crucial, as the Crusaders encountered resistance from local forces, both Christian and Muslim, and faced harsh conditions. But for many, the physical hardships, the scorching heat of the desert, the long stretches without food or water, the constant threat of disease were as formidable as any enemy they might face on the battlefield. These were men and women who had answered Urban's call for redemption, but as the journey wore on, they began to question whether they had been truly prepared for the enormity of what they were undertaking. The spiritual toll of the crusade becomes more evident as the months drag on. The promise of salvation that had once seemed so certain begins to feel distant, especially as many crusaders begin to lose their lives to the harsh conditions of the journey. For those who survive, the battlefield is no longer a place of divine righteousness, but a brutal reality where life is fragile and the promise of eternal life seems further and further away. The question arises, was the price of salvation truly worth the suffering, the death, and the hardship? As you reflect on the significance of these trials, it's clear that Urban's original call for the liberation of Jerusalem has morphed into something far more complex. The Crusaders are no longer just fighting for the Holy Land. They are fighting for their own survival, trying to make it through each day as they face hunger, disease, and an uncertain future. The early religious idealism has been replaced by a more pragmatic approach to survival, a reminder that the journey was never going to be as simple as Urban's promises of salvation had made it seem. But even as the realities of the journey set in, there is still a deep sense of faith that keeps the Crusaders moving forward. Despite the hardships, despite the countless lives lost, there remains a belief, however fragile, that the crusade is a holy mission. They march on not just for land or power, but for a divine cause, one that transcends earthly concerns. The men and women who joined the crusade may have been motivated by different desires, some seeking redemption, others seeking glory, but they all share a common belief that they are part of something much greater than themselves. The legacy of Urban II's speech at Clermont is now clear. What began as a call to liberate a city to reclaim a sacred place for Christendom has become a movement that spans continents, that unites diverse peoples in a shared cause. Yet the Crusades are also a reminder of the complexity of religious warfare. Urban's speech, so full of promise and idealism, has given way to a reality that is as much about survival and power as it is about faith and redemption. In the end, the Crusades' outcome will not just be determined by the battles fought on the fields of the Holy Land, but by the toll it takes on the hearts and minds of those who take part in it. The promises of Urban's words will continue to resonate, but the costs of the crusade, both physical and spiritual, will leave a mark on the Crusaders, the lands they fought to conquer, and the future of Christendom itself. The echoes of that speech at Clermont will linger for centuries, shaping the future of Europe, the Church, and the Holy Land. But as you imagine the weary Crusaders continuing their journey eastward, you understand that this is only the beginning of a much larger story, one that will unfold in ways that even Urban II could not have foreseen. The First Crusade is a chapter in the long, complex history of religious warfare, a chapter that, while ignited by Urban's words, will be defined by the experiences of those who lived through it. As the dust settles and the Crusaders press forward, each step taken is one towards the unknown. The battles fought, the lands crossed, and the hardships endured are part of a larger journey, one that will forever be etched into history. And though the streets of Clermont now feel distant, the memory of Urban's speech, the promises, the fervor, the faith continues to shape the path ahead. The Crusaders march onward, a testament to the power of words and the resilience of those who believe they are fulfilling a higher calling. But for now, the journey is far from over. The future remains uncertain, but with every step, every challenge faced, the echoes of that fateful day at Clermont continue to resonate as they carry the weight of a world divided by faith, ambition, and the promise of salvation. All right, it's time to close your eyes now, Now let the journey fade into the quiet corners of your mind and drift into rest. Sweet dreams. And may you rest easy, knowing that you are part of a much larger story, one that stretches across the ages, echoing through time.